Chapter 15. Flowers and Casseroles. Daniel's shirt collar was overly starched and scratched against his neck, and his shoes were too tight, forcing him to keep flexing his toes so that they wouldn't fall asleep. He had already gotten rid of that awful tie, a blue and black one that he had to wear to church back in Philadelphia, and he wondered if it would be rude to take off his shoes as well, and just walk around in his socks. There was a hole in one of them, over his right pinky toe, but that shouldn't matter. A boy should be able to walk around in his own house with holes in his socks. What prevented him from doing so was that his house was full of strangers. Daniel refused to call them guests. Guests were people you invited to a party or some other kind of joyful event. But these people all came together because something awful had happened. And now they were all in Daniel's house, eating and drinking together for some reason that Daniel couldn't begin to understand. The funeral had been earlier in the day. Daniel's parents drove them out to the small church that Graham used to go to before she got sick. There was a reverend who said some nice things about Graham, and then said a whole lot more about God and heaven and stuff. Daniel had thought he spent far too much time on God, and wished he'd talked a little more about Graham. But he seemed kind enough, and he shook Daniel's hand when it was over and told him to be brave. Then he drove out to the cemetery, and some more people said some more nice things. Daniel's mother started to say something, but then she got too upset to speak, so his father stepped in and put his arms around her. Daniel heard her saying, "My mom's gone," over and over, and this struck Daniel as strange for some reason. Graham was just Graham. He didn't think of her as someone's mom. In the same way Daniel's mother was just Daniel's mother, he didn't think about her being someone's daughter. When they came home, everyone came with them. They all brought over food, sandwiches, potato salad, cakes and pies, and too many casseroles to count, which Daniel figured was supposed to be a nice gesture, but he wondered what they would do with all the stuff, since there was no way one family could ever eat so much. It seemed like an awfully big waste. So with a house full of strangers bearing food, Daniel found himself sitting on the back porch with Georgie, tugging at his overstarched collar. Georgie was lucky, Daniel thought. His parents had changed him out of his nice clothes the minute they got home. They were probably afraid that he would get them all dirty, which, in fact, he would have. He was sitting in the dirt right now, putting one of his favorite balls into the back of a toy truck, dumping it, and then starting all over. He had been at it for 20 minutes and seemed nowhere close to quitting. When the back door opened, Daniel turned around, expecting to see another one of the adults offering their condolences and some more food. But he was surprised to find a strange girl he didn't recognize standing behind the screen. She was wearing a dark dress with a lacy collar and white stockings. Her hair was done up in braids. "Are you one of my cousins?" Daniel asked. "Are you a moron?" the girl snapped back. Daniel did a double take. "Molly?" Molly came out onto the porch, let the door clang shut behind her. She sat down next to Daniel on the steps and smoothed out her skirt while tugging at her stockings. "I didn't recognize you. In that dress. And your hair." Not another word. Daniel said nothing, but he couldn't resist a smile. It was the first time he smiled in days. My mom and dad are inside talking to your parents. They brought over a casserole and told me to see if you wanted anything to eat." Daniel rolled his eyes. "No, thanks. Rowan's here, but some woman has him cornered and won't stop pinching his cheeks. That would be my mom's great aunt Flora. She never had any of her kids of her own, and, well, I got the Flora treatment earlier." Daniel rubbed his left cheek. It was still sore. "So, are you okay?" "I'm okay," answered Daniel. Then the two of them sat together and watched Georgie in his dump truck. Eventually, Rowan joined them. He was wearing a smart little bow tie and a dark suit that was too big in the sleeves. "That woman must be stopped," he said, rubbing the feeling back into his cheek. "She's just lucky I don't have super strength." The three of them sat on the porch and chatted about nothing for a while. Daniel had hoped that the people would get tired and go home early, but instead the noise from inside the house just got louder. More people were showing up at every minute, and Daniel was glad that they hadn't yet spilled out into the backyard. Eventually, the conversation turned to the night at the quarry. Daniel couldn't believe that it had happened only 3 nights ago. To him, it seemed like something out of an entire another life. Someone else's life. Molly had already told Rowan about the shroud and the tunnel with a solid rock door, but now was an opportunity to fill him in on the details. Molly went through with their whole adventure together, play by play, while Daniel sat silently, picking at the paint peelings on the porch steps. Occasionally, Molly would ask Daniel if she was getting some little detail right, and he would nod or offer a clarification. But all this was a story that Daniel had no desire to be a part of again. Even if it was just in its retelling, his mind was on Graham. He'd meant to spend more time with her, but there was always seemed to be something else that needed doing. His friends, his superpowered friends, had needed him while Graham got sicker and sicker. Apparently, Daniel had chosen his priorities, and he'd chosen wrong. "Well," said Rowan after Molly was finished, "I think that settles it. We need to tell Eric." Molly said nothing, but looked at Daniel instead. "What?" he said. "You guys can do whatever you want." "Yeah," said Molly, "I know that, but I want to know what you think." "What I think is that I don't want to think about this anymore." "Daniel's right," said Rowan. "This isn't the time to make decisions." "No, you don't understand," said Daniel, looking at them. "I mean, I don't want to think about this ever again. This was never my business to begin with. I can't fly, I can't see mountains on the moon, and when I wake up on my 13th birthday, I will be the same as the day before. Ordinary." "Daniel," began Rowan, but Daniel didn't let him finish. Daniel stood and scooped Georgie into his arms. Georgie began to whine and reach for his toy truck, but Daniel ignored him. He carried him back up the steps and into the house. In the doorway he paused and looked back once more at his friends. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm just a plain useless kid. I can't save anybody." Then he shut the door and let the noise of the party swallow him up. Inside, Daniel walked Georgie past crowd after crowd of well-wishers, offering sympathetic pats on the head. Georgie loved the extra attention, and since he was too young to understand about Graham's death, Daniel felt as if he should be carrying little Georgie's grief around with his own. It would have been the big brotherly thing to do, but he just didn't have room for it. Daniel's own hurt was too big. He found his mother in the dining room. She was sobbing again, and a few kindly-looking old ladies were rubbing her back and handing her tissues. "The whole time, I just kept wishing there was something I could do," he heard her say. "I just felt so dang helpless." Daniel's mother never cursed, not even that mostly harmless word. He turned and left the dining room without letting her know he had been there. He was on his way back to the kitchen when he saw the older man, tall and strong-looking, standing off in the corner alone. His black suit looked expensive, not like Daniel's father's all-purpose gray one that he was wearing today. The man looked at Daniel and smiled. There was something familiar about him. He recognized the white-bearded grin that had greeted him outside Plunkett's mansion. "Hey, Daniel," came a sudden voice from behind him. Daniel turned and saw Eric coming over to him. Eric wasn't dressed up like everybody else, and for some reason that pleased Daniel immensely. "Hey, Eric, Daniel's words were lost somewhere in his throat. Eric seemed to understand. He just nodded and put his hand on Daniel's shoulder. When he let go, Daniel looked back to where the well-dressed man had been standing, but he'd disappeared. Plunkett's man, whoever he was gone. Eric picked up Georgie and bounced him in the air, to Georgie's squealing delight. "How are you holding up with all this?" Eric gestured to the crowds and buffet tables that had invaded Daniel's home. "I'm all right, I guess. I wish there was a little less of a party. Yeah, I guess grown-up deal with death by drinking and eating. My mom did a lot of drinking, and I mean a lot of drinking when my dad died." Daniel looked at him in shock. He'd gathered from previous conversations that Eric's dad wasn't around anymore, but he'd assumed that Eric's parents were divorced. It had never occurred to him that Eric's father might not even be alive. "Eric, I didn't know about your dad. I'm sorry." "Yeah, well, it was a long time ago. I was only 5 when he got sick. Mom tried over the years to give me a new dad. Several. But it turns out her taste in men has gotten worse and worse." "So, Bob?" asked Daniel, remembering the blue Chevy parked outside his home. Eric shrugged. "Another deadbeat. Mom threw him out again last week, but he'll just come crawling back again sooner or later." "How do you do it, Eric?" "Do what?" "How do you deal with so much? I mean, I just lost Graham, and I'm so angry right now that Daniel stopped. Again, he couldn't go on. Luckily, he didn't have to. "Look, it's not like I never get angry," said Eric. "Believe me, I do. Sometimes I get so angry I scare myself. But that's what being a hero is all about, right? Overcoming your fears and failures to help other people, like Johnny Noble did." Eric smiled. I know you cringe when I talk like that, but it's true. I don't cringe, Daniel protested. Yes, you do, and so does Molly. You guys are afraid that one day I'll show up in a cape and tights, and that will be it. But the whole idea of being a superhero is not about any of that. It's about being a better person. And Johnny is an example that shows me what it is to be brave. And I'm not even talking about having powers or being a super or anything. I'm just talking about being the best person that you can be. And that means not giving in to anger or fear. It's what keeps me going. Even though there are people like Clay Cudgeons out there in the world, and people like Bob. All I got is the hope that I will wake up on my 13th birthday the same as I was the day before. I can only do my best and believe that one day I'll be able to do more. The first rule, use your powers to help, never hurt, said Daniel. You bet your butt, said Eric with a smile. Ball, shouted Georgie, pointing to the front yard. Sorry, buddy, answered Eric. Maybe later. Eric handed Georgie back over to Daniel and looked around. Are Ron and Molly around? I've been trying to talk to them for days, but it's like I'm getting the cold shoulder. Last I saw them, they were out back. Oh, why aren't you out there with them? Daniel almost told him everything, right there and then. Plunkett, the shroud, the truth about Johnny Noble, everything. But then he thought about what Eric had said, and how his belief in Johnny kept him going every day despite all his troubles. He just couldn't do it. He couldn't be the one to shatter all of Eric's dreams. Someone would probably have to before this was all over, but it wouldn't be Daniel. Why don't you go on out there, Daniel said. I've got some stuff to do in here. They'll be glad to see you, I'm sure. You all have a lot to talk about. Eric gave Daniel a skeptical look, but he let it slide. Okay, he said. I'll see you later. Sure, answered Daniel, but in truth, he wasn't sure. He'd just made up his mind about something. A few minutes ago, he had been ready to throw it all in, to let the supers, his friends, struggle on their own. Thinking back on what he'd said to Molly and Rowan, he grew ashamed. After everything Eric had been through over the years, he still hadn't given up. With his power, he could have easily gone down the same path Clay had taken. He could have become a bully, or worse. There would have been no one to stop him. But Eric decided to use his powers to help people. Instead, without so much as a thanks, use your powers to help. Daniel watched as Eric headed for the back door, grabbing a handful of white cake on his way out. Alone, Daniel looked around for the well-dressed stranger, but he couldn't find him again. He disappeared among all the flowers that were piling up in the living room. Any space that wasn't already occupied by food was now claimed by a bouquet or a potted plant. Across the crowded room, he saw Louisa and Rose had arrived, and the two of them intercepted Eric on his way out back. Daniel couldn't hear what they were saying, but he saw Eric pointing to him, and then Louisa gave Daniel a small, sad smile. Daniel smiled back and made his way to greet the two sisters. Today he would suffer through the food and the consoling pats on the back and the awkward small talk, because tomorrow he had a big day ahead of him. Tomorrow he was going back to Plunkett's mansion for his friend Eric and all of that. He would face the shroud once and for all, alone.